Hey guys, Board now back with you, and on this video I will be returning to the X-Files. So this is going to be my review of the 10th episode of the first season, and the episode is called Fallen Angel. And really intriguing episode, really strong. This one basically does a lot of world building and really expands on some of the mythology that you've already been introduced to when it comes to UFO like theories or technology, different ideas. And again, there's another very kind of big sort of conspiracy to do with the military, sort of tied in, but there's kind of fascinating sub sort of plots and elements all attached. So I think certainly for a season 1 episode, this is really strong stuff, and it introduces us to a really intriguing character, the character of Max, who appears, I'm sort of forgetting, but I think he appears at least once more in the series, maybe a couple more times, but he sets up some really interesting ideas. He's almost a very different version of Mulder, this kind of more maybe naive, fragile versions of Mulder, but has a lot of the same ideas and conspiracy theories and sort of anxieties, but a very different sort of Mulder, less assured sort of thing. And I'll talk more about Max, but I think the actor brings a lot of vulnerability to him and sort of engages you in a character which otherwise could have been very throwaway, very like sort of stereotypical, sort of geeky, nerdy, just off, kind of, goofball or just, very sort of disposable. I think the actor does a really good job in bringing vulnerability to him. But anyway, the main plot of the episode, the title Fallen Angel, refers to this official term by this government employee, this colonel of the military, where at the start of the episode, like an unexplained like flying object is spotted on like the military radar, and it's flying above military airspace, so it's something out of the norm because it's something which seemingly doesn't belong to the military, and yet it's flying above their airspace, almost like it's like it would belong, and it's making a landing. So that the people in the control room, they're kind of saying, this is really strange, what's going on here? But you have this very this colonel who's obviously knows more than he's letting on, and he's very much a stern face, kind of, he's shutting them down basically, and kind of this sense of paranoia is kind of around him, and this very uneasy sort of feel when this pops up, and he's the one who used the terms fallen angel in regards to this piece of like technology, and this just this description for like this aircraft, this unidentified sort of object, which seemingly has nothing to do with the military, but clearly he knows something about this, and he's the one who's been tasked with controlling it. And there's a nice cameo as well for Deep Throat in this episode. It's a really interesting Deep Throat episode too. I'll get to more on that in a minute, but Deep Throat at the start of the episode, or near the beginning, basically goes to Mulder with this new case, and he basically says that the colonel who's involved, he was tasked with like in the Cold War, that sort of thing, like a weapons sort of commander or colonel. And that's almost why the government have installed him in this case, because he's very like accustomed to dealing with stuff like this. So Deep Throat warns Mulder that then you've basically got probably something like 24 hours at the most to get to this crash site, because there's been a crash in the local forest in West Conscience. So he warns Mulder, probably got like 24 hours at best before they clear the whole site, and there'll be no trace of any, any evidence of there ever being like a UFO or any sort of incident. So again, you get this interesting character stuff with Mulder, where he basically goes off on his own. He goes to West Conscience, and it's again very much Mulder flying outside of like the parameters of like government and the FBI, and just going kind of rogue. He goes undercover. And one thing I really love actually is because he gets to the campsite, or well, not the campsite, but the site of where there's like this wreckage of like this aircraft, and he starts taking photos, but you just get a shot of his face at one point, and it's almost like his eyes like light up almost. It's almost like that kind of expression that a teenage boy would have, like just staring through like a girl's bedroom window or something, like discovering this undiscovered sort of world. But it's a glorious shot because, of course, to Mulder, I mean, this does hold this sort of fascination to him. And I have to say also, for a show which at this point is still obviously very low budget, I think some of this stuff does look pretty damn good. I think, like when he's looking at this stuff and the various like sort of bits and pieces, and he's taking the photograph. It looks pretty convincing for what it is. I think they really used the landscape quite well. And another thing which comes into play, sort of side by side to this plot, is that like a local like ranger or sheriff, he's gone to the woods. And he's called in this thing because he starts seeing like something happening, and there's basically a fire around this time. And then the idea is that he's attacked by something in the woods when he's gone to investigate, and it's all around this same sort of area. But what happens is Mulder's arrested. They catch him like taking photographs, and he's like taken in, and you get the scene with the colonel where they've basically like ripped up the film, and they're basically putting the pressure on Mulder, forget what you've seen and just walk away, this sort of thing. And they obviously know who he is, and you get some of the sort of typical Mulder sort of like one-liners and humour back, just bantering away, just like sticking it. It's like you knocked out a fill-in sort of thing, and kind of putting heat on the colonel and questioning him, seeing if he'll kind of crack or whatever. I mean, I think the colonel character in this is maybe a bit one note. I think the actor does a good job. I think he's like got a decent sort of presence to him. It's just that maybe it is like that, just maybe typical like one note sort of military enforcer type that you sometimes get a fair bit in the X-Files. I think obviously there's this temptation to just have this kind of by the numbers, like governmental, like just enforcer sort of thing, where he is very one note, he's very sort of tunnel vision. But the actor himself, I think, does a good job, and there is kind of more nuanced stuff in the episode besides that, and some of the stuff we see in the episode like ties into other things that we've seen before now, and it sort of expands on that, which is good stuff. So some of the stuff they were building up in Deep Throat back in episode 2, I think some of the stuff in this episode has a similar sort of feel as well. So what happens is that basically Mulder is taken to, like, he's put in a cage, and eventually Scully has to go and break him out. But before she comes along, he gets talking to the character of Max, and Max, we basically find out, has followed Mulder's career, so he sort of knows who he is, even though Fox has never seen him in his life. And Max in himself is like part of like this underground sort of UFO conspiracy type group so in a way he's there for exactly the same reason that Mulder is, and I think it becomes a big part of this episode, the suggestions of not just the fact that Max is interested in this stuff, but then he might have direct sort of experiences of this, and so in that sense he's been drawn towards this site, and it's almost like the UFO or the alien UFO, whichever term you want to use, maybe trying to cover its tracks, maybe try and make sure that the secret doesn't get out. And at the same time, there's this interest from the military and the government as well. But as I said before about Max, I think there's some great vulnerability to him, and this sort of likable, grounded sort of nature. So I think the actor really does bring that sort of energy. And there's some great character stuff going on in this episode. I really like actually Scully's like disapproving look, like in a later scene when Max is sort of almost shaming Mulder in a way. He's kind of coming out with all this stuff that Mulder has said in publications and stuff, which is very kind of anti-government type statements, and again playing up all sorts of conspiracy theories. But Mulder, because he is like an employee and stuff, he's done it in like pseudonyms and various things, but it's obviously the sort of stuff that Max believes in as well. But Mulder obviously is a government agent and what have you, but Max says, you don't think that pseudonym would actually fool anyone, did you? And Mulder's like, well, I didn't think anyone was paying attention, and Max has this line about someone's always paying attention. And what I like about some of this stuff is that I think it almost digs into not just like the fabric of like UFO conspiracy theories and groups and this kind of cult that can build up around this sort of thing, but I think it also like has this link now when you think about online culture and modern media and just some of the culture we see around TV shows and almost like fanaticism around that and different groups. And so I think there is this weird sort of connection between that and this idea of like UFO sort of cult type groups and various fan theories, and the way we see that now with TV shows and the way that's really taken off in the last 10-15 years. And I'm not really making a judgment whether that's good or bad. I think there's probably good and bad, but I think that's something which is now really fascinating looking back on this episode and stuff. But there is some sort of good comedic stuff woven in, like, as I said, some of Scully's like disapproving looks when Max is coming out with this stuff, and Mulder's, whatever. But Scully kind of has this look of like this really stern, almost like headmistress like look. It's like, what the fuck? And she's almost quite intimidating in a way. It's sort of like you wouldn't want to like mess with her. But I think what's good about this episode too is this sense that although Scully has become more closer to Mulder and does trust him, and she's becoming a bit more open-minded about his ideas, is then there's still a sense that they're not quite there yet in their relationship, and in her like maybe willing to go to the ends of the earth for him or his ideas, because obviously he feels like in this sense he still wants to go rogue. This was something he felt he maybe had to do on his own. I think maybe there's probably a sense of him wanting to protect her in this as well. Then maybe he felt it would be a bit unfair to drag her into it, even though obviously that's what ends up happening. But there's still a sense where it's still a very slow burn in terms of their relationship, in terms of them totally trusting each other, or them coming together on this whole conspiracy theory type thing. And again, I think this episode does a good job of writing that sort of tension, where throughout the episode there's various things that come up. And obviously some of the stuff with Max really kind of pinpoints this, because he's on like medication, and at one point Scully's like looking through his medication, and she later comes back when it becomes relevant, because Mulder says, well, it's for his epilepsy, and Scully says, well, it's not all for that, because some of his like tablets were for like really intense, kind of sort of psychological condition, like depression sort of thing. So she has this idea that he's sort of delusional because of the amount of drugs he's on and stuff. But yeah, what happens is he has epileptic sort of fits, and I think this is another clever way the episode sort of links like UFO phenomena and sort of like the human condition. I think this is almost classic sci-fi in a way. Often the best sci-fi is all about the impact on the human condition, the human sort of like body and stuff. So I think that's quite a nice little link made between like epilepsy, seizures and stuff, and kind of UFO and the effects, this sense of kind of aliens, sort of controlling someone. There's almost a direct sort of parallel sort of there, and it's again where the actor playing Max does a really great job. It's a really sort of physical, like nervous performance. In some ways he sort of steals the episode, but there's various ideas Mulder has. He has this idea that because Max has like these incisions on his ears, and Mulder says, I've seen this on two other people, two women, but what's kind of spooky about it is the fact that they were women who lived like miles apart. They're not women who know each other. Yet they had the same incisions Max does, and they both claim to be to be abducted by a UFO, or to have been abducted by a UFO. So there's some meaty stuff in there, and that's kind of when Scully comes back with the idea that Max maybe was delusional because of his medication and stuff. So I think, obviously, again, although you're inclined to go with Mulder's version of things a bit more, there's still some logical explanations from Scully, and some good, practical sort of reasoning, and that comes into play with the aircraft as well, and because there's a connection to radiation, and Scully comes up with some ideas for and there's certain official explanations given. At one point it's claimed what happened then it was a Libyan air fighter, and that's the official explanation given, and Mulder just sort of cuts that to shreds. Basically, it's well, would they be making all this fuss over one Libyan air fighter, and sort of various things he says. And I do like the line actually when she says, well, that explanation is highly classified, and Mulder said, well, a highly classified lie. But Max basically becomes central to this episode because Mulder points out at one point that this is, he was in facility. His camper van was located in the facility of what happened in the woods that night, and he's basically saying that's a pretty big coincidence, especially with some of the ideas of he has around Max. So we kind of get this plot where basically Max is drawn towards this UFO, or whatever it is, this entity drawn towards the scene, and the idea is that the Colonel is basically trying to track Max down and trying to get a hold of him before anything gets out, any exposure comes throughout him. And there's a pretty sort of trippy sort of scene in the warehouse when Mulder and Scully get to Max, and Mulder's in there, and then it sort of shows up on the military radar that there's sort of three entities in there. So there's Mulder, there's Max, and then there's another one. And then there's this, I think maybe the iconic visual of the episode is Max being hoisted up in the air, and sort of light around him. At one point Mulder's tossed to the side, and then that's when Max is lifted up and stuff, but then he bizarrely sort of disappears. And there's a couple of other things going on, like to do with this woman who her husband has died as a result of this whole incident with the crash site and stuff, and there's basically military pilots all getting radiation burns and stuff, and this particular widow, she is very nervous when the agents talk to her, because she's kind of saying things well, because she's got a son now, she's now a single parent, so she's kind of basically they threaten to take the pension away if she talks to anyone, and she also claims that they won't give up the body so that she can have a proper funeral, and this becomes an emotive sort of scene where Scully is obviously very sympathetic, and I think there's this belief in Scully at this point that she still wants to believe that the government wouldn't do this, or there's at least some protocol that they have to follow. There's, they're not above the law in a way, but obviously part of the whole conspiracy idea behind the X-Files series, and sometimes they are above the law, or at least they feel they are, and they treat it that way. But Scully's like very sort of emotive in this scene, very supportive of the mother, and wants resists the idea that they can't get away with this stuff if that is the case. And there's also another nice little touch where Scully is, because of her medical background, she actually helps out with like the air pilots who have been, they've got really bad radiation burns, and Fox he still has that stigma, so he's kind of kicked off away from the facility by the colonel. But the doctor actually stands up for Scully. He kind of says, well, you can do what you like out there, but in here I call the shots. He like says that to the colonel, and he's like, Dr. Scully stays because of her medical background, unless you don't want me to treat your pilots, basically. So that's good stuff, and it's another way to kind of make us again, believe in Scully as a character, as one of the good guys, essentially. So there's a lot of really good stuff in this episode. I think there's one or two slight elements that's not so great, but I think they are small things that a lot of it may just be to do with the budget. I think a couple of times there's scenes like where whatever the thing is, the UFO and the presence, there's certain, it sort of cuts around it, I guess, because of the budget, and sometimes the effects don't quite hold up and stuff, but I think largely it is to do with the budget. But I do like actually the way it comes back to some of the mythology, and there's a nice little sort of succinctness to it, actually, the way it builds on things that have been raised before. So I think some of like the marks on Max's ears and stuff, for example, that's been brought up before, or something similar. So there's a nice continuity there, I feel. And kind of the end of the episode, the sort of plot is that Scully and Mulder basically have to be back in Washington, and the reason for that is because word has got out to the government, to the FBI bigwigs, about Mulder basically going off on this mission where he hasn't been given official sort of clearance. And Scully says, well, the X-Files are in jeopardy because of this. If you come back to Washington for the hearings, we might have a chance of saving it. And we get these sort of hearings where Scully is obviously the more rational, but she's also does her best maybe to come to Mulder's defense. Whereas Mulder's obviously a lot more confrontational, and he's trying to get his message out there, and isn't really taking in any of this government official sort of lies and stuff. And there's this apparently this claim from the colonel where he said apparently Max was found 2 hours after the initial incident, which Mulder basically says, well, yeah, that's a lie basically, but what can I do if it's been rubber stamp sort of thing by an official. But the interesting twist at the end of the episode is that Mulder, basically it looks as though they're going to shut down the X-Files, but the twist in the tale is then Deep Throat appears again, and we see this official who's been doing the interview at the hearing. He goes to Deep Throat, and he's like all uptight. It's like, well, why did you intervene in this? You know, we had enough evidence to close down the X-Files, basically. And Deep Throat, you know, appears to him, and he appears to be playing both sides, but he basically does the classic keep your friends close but your enemies closer speech. So he's, you know, suggesting to like this official then it's actually a lot more convenient, a lot more sort of logical to keep Mulder safe, to sort of feed him these ideas, the sort of ideas that it makes it easier to control him, whereas there's other information where if he was exposed to it, that could be a lot more dangerous for the government. So it's a good twist, and it's actually Deep Throat who intervenes and like saves the X-Files. But on the other hand, you're obviously meant to question this, whether Deep Throat is, oh, does this mean that he's actually on the government side and is like against Mulder and Scully, or does it mean then he's actually working for not working for Mulder, but that he's on Mulder's side, but he's kind of being diplomatic and kind of, you can read it either way, but then basically he's using his influence in the government to help Mulder to further his like investigation in the X-Files, and so it's a really good use of Deep Throat in this episode because it does raise questions over his loyalties. Where does it lie? It's really interesting final scene. So yeah, mostly I'm really liking this episode. I think, as I said, it certainly stands out for a season 1 episode and builds some good ideas. And I think when it comes to supporting characters or like a character who only appears, it's either 2 or maybe 3 times at the most in the series, I think Max is one that really stands out from the crowd. So that's Fallen Angel. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think it is a really strong episode. I think when it comes to the list of X-Files episodes, I'm probably going to put it second. I think I'll put it just below the Ice. Ice is still the best episode so far. I would say I would really go to bat for that one as maybe one of the best ever episodes of the show, full stop. So then it's quite close, I think, between this episode, Fallen Angel, and Squeeze for the number 2 spot. And it's close because I think Squeeze, just as like a classic Monster of the Week one, I think that character was really terrifying and chilling, and it had quite a unique story in itself. And it's sort of funny looking at this show because obviously a lot of the best episodes are like the Monster of the Week standalone ones. And Squeeze certainly stands out as one of those, but I think overall I really like the ideas that this episode is poking at, and I think it's a really well crafted story and has some intriguing character stuff. So maybe overall I just see it as being a bit more richer and intriguing and has some fun mystery elements compared with Squeeze. So I think overall I might like it a bit more. So yeah, they have it, Fallen Angel going in at number 2 on my list of X-Files episode. Let me know if you agree or disagree, and I will obviously keep the rankings going as I move along. It's actually been a while since I've done an X-Files, so I'll try and keep them more regular as much as I can, see how this goes with sort of a busy period going into Christmas, but I'll do my best keep on track. So yeah, that's episode 10 of the X-Files, Fallen Angel. I will return next time with a review of Eve, episode 11. So if you guys want to watch that, then watch it before the next review so you can comment, like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.